this module, this hour is about emotion. How do we manage emotion? All of these difficult emotions that we are experiencing in this pandemic. So let me throw it over to the PowerPoint here. There we go. So to understand kind of the context for this, this why it's so important for us to understand just some kind of basic process or model for understanding emotions, you really have to rewind 20 years to really appreciate. I mean, like, things are challenging and difficult now. You know that, and I know that. But let me put some context to it so that you can really understand, like, oh my gosh, how severe this is, how important it is. Let's rewind to 2001, 20 years ago. This was where I did my postdoc. This was at Brown Medical School in Providence, Rhode Island. That's Bradley Hospital. This is an inpatient and outpatient treatment center. We serve kids as young as 3 up to age 18. And whenever an ambulance or a caseworker or a police officer or a parent pulled through this drive and came to this front door right here, we knew it was all hands on deck. We knew that that child was there to receive what was then the front line of mental health intervention. So we would bring them in, and we would, essentially the protocol was evaluate and treat. Psychological evaluation, and then treat was individual therapy, group therapy, family therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, psychiatric intervention, social work, whatever it was, they got a full complement of services. And so here's a picture of, this is a little young child there in a treatment room. It looks like getting some kind of sensory integration therapy probably from an OT. So that was it. That was the state of the art back then. That was the front line of mental health intervention 20 years ago. So that was then. Fast forward to 2020, and this is pre-COVID, mind you. This was January of 2020. That used to be the front line of mental health intervention, but by January of 2020, this had become the front line of mental health intervention at your average public school. It used to be that treatment happened in a room like that, and that was the front line, but now it's happening in a classroom. So you, my friends, my dear friends, my dear educator friends, with your undergraduate and graduate degrees in education, you are the front line of mental health intervention. And yes, that's scary, and yes, that's intimidating, and yes, that's overwhelming, and yes, it's exhausting. It absolutely is. We always say that, I always say, you don't have to be a thoracic surgeon to perform CPR. And sometimes CPR can save a person's life. And you don't have to be a licensed mental health professional to really, really help a child who's struggling emotionally. Sometimes just basic mental health first aid, basic SEL skills can go a long, long way to helping kids. And you as an educator are perfectly, fully qualified to do that. So part of what we're talking about now, when we talk about how to manage my emotions and how to help kids manage their emotions, it's sort of an intro to SEL. And we'll talk more about that. But this is the front line of mental health intervention. It's the classroom now. And so that's the deal. This is data, again, pre-COVID. 20% of youth between the ages of 13 to 18 experienced a severe, not mild and not moderate, but a severe mental disorder. And less than half of them were getting treatment. And that was the NAMI's data in 2020. People, I kind of talked about this before, but people are saying like, oh, COVID, the damage it's doing, yeah, it is. I mean, absolutely, it's doing psychological damage. But, for the first 6 months and even now, what we're dealing with, it didn't cause, it just exposed. This was already here, way back when, in, this time last year, it was already this severe. It's just going to get worse over the next, year, 2, 3, 4 years is all of this. So it's like you imagine a boat rushing through the water, making a wake, and then the boat slows down and gets off a plane, and all that water, whoosh, it comes up. Well, all of that emotional wake, it's going to catch up and get to us. And again, I'm not trying to sound doom and gloom and, the sky is falling. I'm just, call me Dr. Phil or whatever. I'm just calling it like I see it. So I think that's the deal. So that's the deal. Kids have, significant emotional issues that are only getting worse. You contrast that with 78% of teachers who said, I'm not equipped to deal even with the mild stuff, not the moderate, mild stuff. Are you kidding me? I got a degree in education, not in psychology. I don't know what to do here. 82% said, yep, I get it. Building relationships are important. But nobody taught me how to do SEL. Nobody taught me how to build relationships with a student that's struggling, that, an anxiety disorder or an undiagnosed mental illness or somebody like that. I don't know what to do. So you have this huge discrepancy that the kids' needs are getting greater and greater, and we're trying to keep up, but we're not keeping up, and we weren't keeping up before the pandemic. The pandemic has just sort of put everything, exacerbated everything, and made it even worse. So that's what's going on, and it's really challenging, and it's given us a run for the money. So here's the deal, my educator friends. There's this saying that if all you have is the hammer of traditional behavior management, right? All you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, you know, it was sort of like we knew, like, oh, yes, educator, you're becoming the front line of mental health intervention. You're going to need some tools to deal with that. Oh, we got it. Ding, ding, ding. We've got this toolbox for you that we put together in the 1950s, and that toolbox is behavioral psychology. And in that toolbox, you're going to have two drawers, two main tools that you're going to use. Number one are carrots. You're going to ignore mildly inappropriate behavior. You're going to redirect behavior. You're going to offer social praise and reinforcement. And then in your second drawer, you have sticks, office referrals, in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, and that's it. And back in the 1950s, when we put that toolbox together, it worked like a champ, you know. Kids, you know, Adam's chewing gum in class, and then you say, Adam, do I need to write a note home to your mom about that gum? And, oh, no, ma'am, you don't, because I know you're going to see her in Sunday school, and I don't want you to give bad reports at Sunday school, right? You know, and it worked like a champ right back in the 50s, and then in the 60s. Well, by the late 60s, you know, it didn't work, and so what happened was we started focusing heavily on the sticks in the 70s, you know, just kicking kids out of school, in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension. And then, you know, there's this axiom in psychology that if the behavior doesn't change, the intervention's not working. It's just that simple. So if suspension, and there's a time and a place for it, but if suspension was effective in increasing academic engagement, then what you would expect to find is that the higher level of suspensions you have in a school district, the higher level of academic achievement you would have. And that's just not the case. There's an inverse relationship. The more suspensions you have, that district is usually characterized by less academic achievement. And we started figuring that out back in the 70s, that, oh, these sticks aren't really helping motivate any behavior. And back in my day, it was a literal stick like you got hit with. So we were going to beat the ADHD out of this child named Lou, and we're going to make him walk the straight and narrow. It turns out that pain is not an effective intervention for neurological disorder. So there's that. I'm not bitter about it. So anyway, so that was it. So that we used sticks, and then and in the 80s, and then by the 90s, we started figuring out, like, hey, we can't be suspending kids for every little thing, and it's just not working. So then we said, well, you know what? Let's go back and let's focus on the carrots, and we're going to call that positive behavior support. So let's just lay out carrots everywhere we can think to lay them out, you know, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And we're just going to reinforce behavior and offer positive praise and all of that. And that's good. You know, thank God we're doing that instead of, you know, relying on the punishments. And so that, I think I'm all for that. And then we have this one huge power tool in education to help kids with emotional issues, and that's called special ed. And so what we end up doing with that power tool is that in our zeal to help students, we overqualify kids for special ed, kids that they're not eligible, but we find a way to make them eligible because we want to help. And that's the only game in town, you know, in some ways. Less and less so, but it's still the case, you know. So we overqualify kids for special ed, and that ends up diluting the service. And you have too many kids in special ed, and there's no integrity to the intervention. And kids that really have disabilities, they're not getting, you know, there's no fidelity to the treatment. And it's just a bad deal, you know. And I say I'm not blaming anybody. It just speaks to, like, we're limited with that toolbox, with the carrots, the sticks, and special ed. There's only so much you can do with that. And then you contrast that with kids that are coming in that are going to have emotional issues. And if they didn't before, they will now because of this pandemic thing and family stress and drama. And they're not going to qualify. You know, they're going to make a C. They're going to make satisfactory academic progress. They're going to make satisfactory social progress, you know, and they're going to hover along and limp along, and they're just not going to get attended to because the tools that we have won't work. So that's sort of the state of the union. I mean, that's kind of where we're at now. And it's overwhelming. Absolutely. It's absolutely overwhelming. So what I'm going to do now is, now that I've bummed you, now that I killed your lunch buzz, and now that you're thinking, why am I listening to Adam make me depressed? I'm going to revert to comic relief. So that's where we're at now. And like I said before, I have not met anybody that's saying with integrity, I'm living my best game ever. Like, this is the best life I've ever lived. Thank God for the pandemic. So let's talk about this. So I'm going to show you some pictures that contrast the 2019 me and the 2020 me. That was me back in 2019, looking all fresh and great. And that's me now, looking same person, but golly, that's just so not flattering. That was me back in 2019, got my hair done. And then there I am now, like thinking, what am I doing? That was me back in 2019, being a psychologist, rocking it, looking cool. There I am now thinking, what am I doing here? This is lame. 2019, there I am looking studious, got my hair done and everything. That's me now thinking, I want to go home. Womp womp. Even animals, man. That cat looks so good this is COVID. That's a COVID cat right there on the right. That's your COVID kitty. That's going to be the name of my next band, Adam and the COVID Kitties. 2019, there's a dog, cute greyhound, wearing a ballerina sweater because evidently their greyhounds get cold and need ballerina sweaters. There's the greyhound saying, man, I've had enough of this year already. Are you kidding me? I'm worn out. So that's it. None of us are, I don't think any of us have our best foot forward at this stage in the game. We're just doing the best we can, and God bless us all, and so there it is. So now let me turn the corner, a round of applause, because I'm done with the doom and gloom. And I'm going to start offering you some practical advice. Melissa and I are going to give you some practical strategies to help you feel less overwhelmed, to give you some sense of like, oh, there is something I can do. This is awesome. So let's jump into the PowerPoint here. SEL, man, this is the new tool. This is the new, where carrots and sticks fail. And we still need, don't get me wrong, we still need behavioral psychology in school. There's a time and a place for it. But we need more, and SEL is the promising practice. SEL, there's just a ton of research that shows that SEL as an intervention is as psychometrically validated as any academic or behavioral intervention that we've ever done in schools. When we do SEL the right way, kids gain, they make social gains, they make academic gains, and educators who practice SEL are more sustainable. They do better work, and they do it for a longer time because they're practicing SEL. So SEL is that new tool that we're looking at, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Let's move forward. Why does this matter? This thing about SEL and emotional intelligence, and this book right here, I'll just do this. This book, the EQ Intervention, is, again, it came out in January. This documents the work that we've been doing in schools across the country in the area of SEL. And man, I'm just so happy to do this, because I don't know how old I'm, I think I'm 100, but I've been doing this for 20 years, and finally at a point where I feel like, all the stars are aligning. This is why I went to graduate school. This is why I studied psychology. This is why I've lived the life I live, to teach about SEL, because it just makes so much sense. I'm going to give you a real life example, just to help you understand why this SEL stuff is so incredibly important. And then we're going to give you some practical strategies, things that you can start doing right now to develop SEL in your life and to model it for students. So why does this matter? Let's start with this amazing athlete here, the very one and only Michael Jordan, just a stud, arguably the best basketball player ever, arguably one of the best athletes ever, dominated his game. Well, how did Michael Jordan become Michael Jordan? Well, he was sitting around in Chicago one day in his 20s, and he said, I'm bored. I'm sitting here eating Cheetos. I want to be a basketball player. There's a team here. I think they're called the Bulls. Let me go see if that guy will give me the spot. So he went over and said, hey, coach, can I try out? And coach said, yeah, sure. And lo and behold, it turns out he was the best ever. Not how it went. Before Michael Jordan was that rock star professional player, he was a rock star college player in Carolina. Well, how did that happen? Well, he was sitting around in his dorm eating Cheetos. Yeah, in case you can't, I don't eat Cheetos, right? You'll never find orange powder on my hands. He was sitting around in his dorm doing nothing, maybe smoking a joint, and he said, maybe I could be a basketball player. I heard they've got a good basketball team here. Let me go talk to the coach. talked to the coach, and the coach said, sure, come on. Well, of course it didn't go that way. Before he was that player in college, he was a high school player. And yes, it's true that he was cut as a high school player, but by the time he was a senior, he had totally redeemed himself, totally redeemed himself. So the point is that Michael Jordan did not become Michael Jordan overnight as an adult. It traces all the way back to behaviors that he started practiced behaviors in his adolescent years that eventually allowed him to become the rock star that he is, or was, however you want to look at it. Okay, so let's flip and talk about what this means with SEL. Let's talk about that toxic boss you may have had. You don't have a toxic boss there, because I know that your leader is amazing. But maybe you had in a different district or in a different regime, you had a life sucker that was a boss that was a life sucker and toxic. I know I had one. So here's my toxic boss story, and it felt like about that picture there. This guy was it was at a district, and he was just a bully. He was a narcissist and a bully, and he would manipulate and he would power trip, and it was horrible working for this guy, and thank God that he's not only in the district that I worked at, I don't know if he's even in education anymore, because as far as I'm concerned, being around kids is the last place a toxic male leader needs to be. So I get all worked up because it was such a soul suck to work for this guy. And so he was like that, and it's just lame. And so the question, how did that toxic leader become a toxic leader at a district level, leading a district? How did he be? Well, he didn't wake up one day and say, hey, I'm superintendent. I've been a servant leader all these years. And that's, but you know what? I'm going to be an idiot. I'm just going to be a narcissistic idiot, and I'm going to start doing all these narcissistic, idiotic things. And let's see how that goes. He didn't just flip it on a dime and become, before he was a toxic district level leader, he was a toxic campus level leader who bullied and shamed and intimidated. But then again, he didn't wake up one day and said, I've been a life giver up to this point, but now that I have my own campus, let me be a toxic jerk. No, he was a toxic idiot in the classroom, and it goes all the way back to when he was in adolescence. At some point, he never learned how to regulate feelings, and he learned to link his feelings with maladaptive, toxic bullying behaviors to get what he wants. And unfortunately, no one loved him enough to sit him down and put the fear of God in him and say, dude, look, it's okay for you to feel that way, but it's not okay for you to be an idiot, right? And so he learned that behavior back in the day, and it kept going and going and going. And there was another huge district in Texas, one of the top 10 biggest district. Same thing. It was a district level leader that got called out because back in the day, he was just doing hurtful things, and it caught up to him. So that's the point. The point is that when we as adults live toxic behaviors, we don't usually just wake up and say one day, like, hey, you know what, let me try being a jerk and let me put that hat on for the next 10 years and see how that goes. It usually goes back to our childhood behaviors. So that's the deal. So think about the kids that are showing up in our schools now. They're overwhelmed emotionally, understandably, as they should be. Well, what they do with those emotions will create behavioral patterns that they will practice over time that will drive how they behave as adolescents, and that will drive how they behave as young adults, that will drive how they behave as employees, as parents, as leaders, on and on and on and on. So the story goes. That's why this is so important, because through social emotional learning, we're empowering students with a skill set that will serve them for the rest of their life, just as mathematics, just as language arts, just as anything else that we do, that we teach them, will serve them for the rest of their lives. The same thing is true for SEL. It will serve them for the rest of their lives. So that's why this is so important. And you see it happening, in the hallways, bullies. I mean, that's what bullying is all about. It's a kid that doesn't feel good about themselves, but doesn't understand that there are more adaptive ways to express those feelings than hurting somebody. So this kid who's engaging in the bullying behavior, he's got some intense feelings going on inside of him. He's probably bullied. He was probably shamed. He was probably, who knows what he's been through. And this is the only way he knows to get that feeling out. That's essentially what's going on. So we want to give him a different roadmap and say it's okay to feel embarrassed, angry, ashamed, hurt. It's okay to feel like you want to hurt somebody, but it's not okay to hurt somebody. Let's give you a plan B. So that's it. That's again the rationale for why this thing about managing emotions is so important. So again, this matters because the skills and habits we impart to our children carry into their adulthood. Dan Goleman is an American psychologist who wrote a book in the 90s called Emotional Intelligence. He's the one that kind of put EQ on the map. And he said, if you don't have self-awareness, if you're not able to manage your distressing emotions, if you can't have empathy, effective relationships, then no matter how smart you are, you're not going to get very far. And with all due respect to Dan Goleman and the brilliant work he has done, I would just beg to differ, man. That is so not true. That is so not true. You can be, totally lacking all of those things and get very, very far. And if you doubt that for a moment, look at the CEOs, some of the CEOs that run our corporations. Look at who ends up at the top of our political systems. And, you can call that, I'm either side of the aisle. If you're a Democrat, you can hate on Republicans for it. If you're hate on the Democrats, you can get extremely far in this world being an extremely toxic, narcissistic, bullying person. And man, I don't care if you vote red or blue. I don't care if you have an XY chromosome or whatever, man, whoever you are, you can get real far in the world being an idiot, unfortunately. The question isn't, can you get far? You can get far. The question is, how much damage will you do? That's the question. So, and we don't want that. We want our kids to get far in life without doing damage. We want there to be a wake of life and not a wake of death in their path to success. So, man, I'm getting all worked up. See, this is Adam. You just need to chill. Adam's not self-regulating. Somebody call the teacher, man. Adam's losing it. See, is when I started talking about politics, my train went off the track. Okay, I'm regulated. I took a deep breath. When we talk about it, don't laugh. Melissa, quit laughing at me, dude. It's not helping, man. I'm losing credibility. They used to like me, and now they think I'm an idiot. Okay, I need a nap. Okay, so what does SEL look like in a classroom? If we're going to do this thing, there are 5 components. This is from CASEL, C-A-S-E-L, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. Number 1, it starts with self-awareness, me understanding myself. Once I understand myself, I can regulate myself through self-management. Now I'm centered. Now I'm grounded. And then through empathy, I can be connected to you. I can know what's going on with you. And then through my social skills, my relation, I can connect with you. And when this version of me reaches out and connects with you, we make good decisions, man. This is us living our A game, right? This is me making good decisions. And that's what we want. And so when I wrote the EQ intervention and we started doing research, I say my research team at A&M and my clinical team in private practice in College Station started thinking about putting together an SEL intervention. This was the most important piece of data that I looked at, because the deal was, I figured out in therapy, 20 years ago, is that when you're working with a kid, individual therapy, and you know that the parents aren't doing well, you figure out real quick that it doesn't do you much good. It does a little bit of good, but not much good to spend 50 minutes with a kid if you're sending them back into a family system that's overwhelmed with dysfunction. So the more systemic intervention is, well, let me work with the parents for a little bit and help them increase their coping and their capacity for adaptive processing and help them regulate. And that will be the intervention for the student. It's like a tier 1 intervention is when I always say the best tier 1 intervention for every kid is a healthy adult living a good life. Every kid benefits from me being centered and healthy. So that's that. But I figured that out long ago. Like, I'm not going to work with the kids. I want to start working at some point, bring the parents in so we can do parent training as well. So that's the same thing is true with SEL. If we're going to do SEL effectively, it's got to start with adults living this out. I can't teach trig unless I know trig. I can't teach language arts unless I know language arts. And I can't teach SEL unless I'm living it and I'm practicing it, because through what psychologist Albert Bandura called social referencing, kids are looking at me. I am the living intervention. I'm their textbook. It's not this. It's not anything printed. It's my life is the intervention for those kids. And they're going to learn one way or the other. They're going to learn either how to act like a life giver or a life sucker based on how I live my life in front of them. So given that, we have this unique relational dynamic that makes SEL this great thing. That if I can mindfully start living in a certain way in front of kids that expresses emotional intelligence, that expresses SEL, then I am the curriculum. I am showing them how to cope with this crazy, crazy life. So it's got to start with the adults. So that's part of what we're doing now is we're looking at adult SEL. So self-awareness and self-regulation, that's another way to look at it. When you add to that empathy and social skills, you get good decisions. And for right now, we're just focusing on this, self-awareness and self-regulation. So but for now, the question is, how do you become aware of your emotions and how do you regulate your emotions? And this is where we get to the power up. I'm going to give you some practical strategies. Melissa's going to give you some practical strategies. So there are 5 ways that we can manage emotion. Number 1, we can ignore emotion in some way, act like it's not there. So Melissa, did you want to teach on how to manage emotion, or do you want to teach the 5-step process?
The 5-step process.
So you want to teach the 5 steps. So that's the next slide, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, never mind. I'll keep going. So number 1 is ignore emotion in some way, act like it's not there. And so that's just this. Hold on, wrong camera. Ignoring emotion it's basically doing that. Like I know my spidey sense is telling me that my kids are angry or frustrated. I'm just going to ignore it. And there's a time and a place to ignore emotion, truly. But if that's all I'm doing to deal with emotion, if that's my one trick response to emotion is let's just ignore it and act like it's going to go away, it doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. So ignoring emotion, it's not going to help. So think of it this way. Emotional intelligence, or SEL, basically is emotional literacy. It's teaching kids to understand emotions and understand what to do with them. That's the essence of emotional literacy. The great Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, man, I love that guy. He said, all emotions are mentionable and all emotions are manageable. That's emotional literacy, right? So as long as I'm ignoring emotion, we never get to a place of literacy. Imagine if you were trying to teach, written literacy, and you said, we're going to ignore letters. Would we ever get to a place where we could do CAT equals cat, right? No, we can't ignore emotion. So that's one option is to ignore emotion. Second option is to inhibit emotion. So what do? You're not ignoring it. You're saying, look, I know y'all are angry. I know y'all are frustrated. I know you're anxious, but I don't want to deal with it. So you just need to squash it. You leave that anger. When you log on, you leave the anger behind because I'm not dealing with it. Well, okay, you can inhibit emotion, but you can only stuff that stuff for so long. And it's just not, it's not helpful to start inhibiting emotion. And when you say, just deal with it outside of I don't want to do, again, it's just not going to be helpful. Next one is you invalidate emotion. Tell your students why they're wrong to feel how that you shouldn't feel angry. You should feel happy that you have a teacher like me that's so dedicated. I learned about technology so I could teach you. There are starving children in Africa that would love to be able to have my class online, And so you start invalidating their feelings. And again, that's just not helpful because when you start invalidating kids' feelings, you're telling them that they're wrong. You're not building an alliance with them. You're isolating them, and emotions aren't wrong or right. They just are. Emotion is what is, And so when we start telling kids how they should and shouldn't feel, anyone for that matter, then it's just not going to work. We're never going to get to a place of instruction. Well, the fourth option is to invite emotion. Tell my students that all feelings are welcome. Oh my gosh, that is so scary. Because remember, emotion is fuel. Motion, movere, to move. Movement, there's energy inside of me. Happiness, joy, confusion, fear, anxiety, anger, rage, any emotion is fuel. So when you start inviting emotion, you're inviting fuel. And imagine that. Imagine you've got a room full of 16-year-olds or a room full of 8-year-olds, and you're saying, oh, hey, gasoline, bring it to the table, propane, bring it to the table, strong wind, bring that to the table, electricity, bring it to the table. And you're thinking, are you kidding me? All it takes is one match, and if this thing goes up in smoke, we're all done. And yes, that's true. But think of it this way. What if I'm an engineer? And I've got a lot of work to do, and I see all these fuel sources. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, gasoline, bring it to the table. I'm going to put that in my truck, Diesel, bring it to the table. I'm going to put that in my tractor. Electricity, bring it to the table. I'm going to hook my computer up to that. Natural gas, I'm going to hook it up to my stove, and we can cook. And each one of these fuels can drive a machine that will make my life better. That's emotional literacy. That's realizing, even anger is a fuel. And if I hook it up to the right behaviors, it can make my life better. I can be a life giver in my anger. I don't have to be a life sucker. That's what we're talking about here. That's why these emotional roadmaps are so important. But if we're ignoring emotion, if we're inhibiting emotion, or if we're invalidating emotion, we never get to a point where we can hook up the emotion to the right behavior to drive adaptive functioning. And then we instruct emotion. Once we get, and Melissa's going to talk about how to instruct emotion. Once we get to step 5, or the 5th option, now we can actually start hooking that emotion up to behaviors that lead to productive lives. So Melissa's going to talk about it. Before she talks about it, I'm going to explain what that looked like no, you know what? I'm going to hold off on that. I'm going to talk about how we did this at a campus level with adults. After Melissa talks about what it looks like to do it, to instruct. So again, don't want to ignore it. We don't want to inhibit it. We don't want to invalidate. We want to invite so that we can instruct it. And so then you're saying, great, how am I supposed to instruct emotion, Adam? Remember, math degree, English degree. I'm not a licensed mental health therapist. I'm not trying to do therapy with these kids. That's not what we're asking. That's not what we're asking. We're just asking you to take this real simple protocol. So Melissa, let me throw it over to you. See, I always say it's like this. I'm the broadcaster. I do news and sports, and then I flip it over to Melissa, and she does weather and fashion. So from the fashion desk at Applied EQ Group Studios, Melissa's now going to talk about the ways that we can deal with emotion.
Yes.
Okay, Melissa, hold on. Let me see. Melissa, can you see the PowerPoint there on your other screen?
I cannot.
You can. Oh, you're seeing the one on. Okay.
I'm seeing myself, but I was going to share a story first.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
That is connected to how, like a real life example of instructing emotion, and then we can look at the PowerPoint if that's okay.
Yeah.
I was a classroom teacher for several years, and then I had the privilege of coaching teachers in classroom management across the district. And so I remember this one morning in particular, it was 10 a.m. and I'd already been to 2 different campuses, 3 different classrooms that were having behavior issues. And so in those moments, I found myself just asking kids how they were feeling. And so I feel like this one story really shows a good example of what it looks like to instruct emotion. And so this one classroom that I was in, there was a kid that was leaning her chair against she was leaning back in her chair, and you could tell by her face that she was angry. But her teacher was using all the strategies that she had been taught to redirect behavior. And so she was reminding the students of the expectations, she was redirecting the behavior, she was affirming the student whenever she put the chair back on the ground. But then when the teacher would walk away, the kid would just lean back in their chair again. And so she wasn't addressing the emotional part of what I could see was that the student was very angry or sad or frustrated with something. And so the first thing that I did was I came up, and this is actually the first step, is to identify the emotion. And so I pulled her out in the hallway and I just said, "Hey, how are you feeling today? Your face is just kind of showing me that you might be angry or sad. Is that true?" And she looked at me, and she kind of was not as angry she didn't look as angry. It kind of de-escalated her a little bit, and she was like, I am angry because my grandpa, he was about to come visit me, and then he was driving over here and his car caught on fire this morning, and now he's in the hospital and I don't know what's going to happen to him, and I'm scared, and she just started going on. This was a 4th grader, and I was like, "Hey, I actually had gone to yoga that morning, and so I was driving, and when I was driving, I remember seeing this white truck that caught on fire, and so I looked at her and was like, yes. Oh my gosh, yes, I totally saw that. Is your grandpa okay?" And in that moment too, I reminded her that feeling was okay. All of her feelings are okay.
Yeah.
I was like, it is totally okay for you to be angry. And so that's kind of the second step, is to affirm that feeling that they have. The third step is to link it with a behavior. And so what I told her was, it's okay to be angry, but in your classroom, your teacher really wants you to be safe. So when your teacher is telling you to make sure that that you're not leaning back in your chair, it's safe for you and safe for everyone else if you don't do that. And so linking that behavior with a feeling, and then offering a substitute behavior of, let's be safe, let's let's remember all of our emotions are okay, but we also need to be safe. And then whenever she did go back in the classroom and was following the directions and was able to even know and acknowledge what she was feeling, and also following expectations, I affirmed the behavior that she was showing and reminded her it's okay to be sad, it's okay to be angry, but can we also make good choices that are safe for you and safe for others?
Yeah, and what I love about that story is that it just underscores like that classic dilemma, like that was not a stick and a carrot problem. That there was no behavioral psychology in that, and you can say like, I'll give you 3 stickers if you keep your desk on the ground for 5 seconds, and then let's shape that behavior out to 10 seconds, maybe, or you could say I'm going to send it to the office if you can't keep, you get back to that stick and carrot mentality. Again, there's a time and a place for it, but that clearly wasn't, and that's this classic example of where emotion is typically at the root of what's driving the behavior. And I'm so done with behavior management, like it's not about managing behaviors. It's about managing emotion. If you can manage emotion, then your behavior follows, naturally. So that's great. So let's jump onto that PowerPoint there. And Melissa, why don't you kind of talk through these steps? Excellent story, by the way.
Yeah, the first step is to identify the feeling using the feelings chart or any other cues. And so sometimes the feeling charts work really well with kids when they're already escalated to the point of up here. If you go up to them with the feelings chart and you ask, how are you feeling? They may not respond in the way that will be productive. And so that is the time that you can really just say to them, your body is showing me that you are maybe angry. And so, but it's important to have that language. Kids don't know what to do sometimes when we ask them how they feel because no one is asking them how they feel. And especially now in this pandemic, when we go to the grocery store, people are wearing masks. And when we are shopping, people are wearing masks. And so it's easy out in public to just kind of forget that we have emotions because it can sometimes feel like all we see are our eyes of people, and sometimes we can't always tell the emotion from that. And so even now, it's so important to help students remember to identify the emotions that they have.
Yeah, and I think about that too, back to the idea of literacy. Sometimes when you ask a student, let's say like the word of the week was ubiquitous. My word of the week was ubiquitous. You can go onto Twitter and figure out what that means. What the word of the week means. But, if you ask a 3-year-old, hey, tell me what's ubiquitous. I don't know. I've never heard that word. And so there's a lack of literacy there, which is understandable. Well, some kids, it's the same thing with, how are you feeling? I don't know. And they're not just being passive aggressive or they really don't know. They really don't understand that there's a word that goes with, these facial expressions and these feelings inside of them. So that's the initial phase of helping them regulate their emotions is identify the feeling. Yep. Great. Go ahead, Melissa. I'm sorry. I jumped in.
It's okay. And so, that is the first step. Can we go back to the slide for step 2?
Yep.
Step 2 is to validate the feeling. And that's the time to remind them it's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel, sometimes we can even say if a kid is overly happy, and we also need for them to to maybe have some more calmness. It's okay to affirm any emotion, just like all emotions are okay. Affirming any emotion is good. To remind them that we're not trying to get them to feel a different emotion, but we're trying to help them make the best choice with whatever emotion that they're feeling in that moment, so they can learn to connect their emotion to their behavior. And through time, just as we as adults are learning and have learned to regulate our own emotions, the more they can connect their emotion to the behavior that they have, the more that they can grow their own self-regulation.
Great. Okay, hold on. I found an error on the slide. I'm correcting it. Okay. That'll help me sleep at night. Okay, you know how I am, OCD. So you validate the feeling. It's okay to feel angry. Sometimes I feel angry when people ask me to do things I don't really want to do. And there's a good bonding step there because you're aligning with the student. You're building an alliance there. Instead of telling them what they should feel, you just say, yeah, I felt that way before. Cool. Moving along.
Step 3, linking the feeling with a behavior. So this is where you say, I know that you're angry. I felt angry before too. We all feel angry. But when you feel angry, you can't use your body. When you are feeling angry and you're using your body to hurt others, that's not okay. So you validate the feeling, but you speak to the behavior that comes with the feeling that they are experiencing.
Yeah.
And I would use an example for an adult also. When I feel angry, sometimes I want to scream really loud or something, like a kid appropriate example. But it's important for kids to see that we all experience emotion, and that all of our emotions are connected to behavior.
Great. Hold on, I'm fixing another PowerPoint that I messed up. Somebody really needs to do a better job on their PowerPoint. Okay, here we go. So step 3 was, let's go, validate, link it with a maladaptive behavior. And then step 4 is?
To offer substitute adaptive behavior. And
go.
so this is where we teach them what would be most helpful. And in that moment, like with the story that I shared, I could see that the student didn't need to necessarily take deep breaths. What she needed to do was we had this conversation, and so then she was ready to go back inside. But for some kids, it was helpful for them to self-regulate in the moment, and so this is where you can coach them in some of the breathing. And sometimes when I would try this with kids, they'd be like, "That's not going to work," or they would, talk back, and I would just really encourage them to try it and see if it worked. And every time it worked. And so this is where you can remind them that if they feel angry, they can take 5 deep breaths, and then you can just ask them for feedback of how it went, and it typically works. And then the step 5 is to affirm any approximation of the replacement behavior. And both steps 4 and 5, I feel like are so important, because I think a lot of the times kids feel confused about what to do. We might tell them, "I need you to stop. I need you to quit talking. I need you to," and that's fine for them to know that that's the expectation, but we also have to remind them of what they need to do to continue to grow and be better. They don't always have the capability to think in that moment, what do I need? What's the best choice that I can make? And so steps 4 and 5 in this instructing emotion really helps them whenever we are giving them a substitute behavior that they can do, and then whenever they do what we're asking them to do, to affirm the new behavior that we've asked them to do. So if we've asked them to take 5 deep breaths and they start taking 1, you affirm them in that, especially if it's a kid that you know that they're going to get to 3 and they're going to be like, "I'm done with this." So step by step, I feel like is just really encouraging for them, and it reminds them that we are with them and we are for them, and that we want to see them be successful.
Excellent. So those are the steps for instructing emotion. So the nice thing about that, or where that should give us hope is we're not going to ignore emotion. We're not going to inhibit it. We're not going to invalidate it. We're going to invite it so that we can instruct it. So we're bringing all these fuel sources to the table so that we can hook them up to the right behaviors that will drive adaptive behaviors. And now you have sort of a roadmap of what that will look like. Any emotion can be expressed in ways that are life-giving. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back and talk through what this looks like at a district level, at a campus level, at this campus that I worked with. Let's see, let me find the right slide here. There we go. This, just to give you a little backstory on this campus, elementary school, and they had been, it had been an early childhood school, 3 to 5, for years and years and years and years, and that was their identity, was we're the early childhood school, and they were just a tight community. And then another school was not doing well over several years, and so they merged the schools, and so now it was a K-5 or early childhood through 5 school. And no one was excited. The people that were when it was part of early childhood, they didn't want to break up. They had a good thing going and they didn't want to break it up. The people that were coming from moral defeat, and they didn't want to be coming. And it was just a bad thing. Oh, and by the way, it's COVID, Oh, and by the way, you have a new principal. So I was working with the leaders of that campus, and how do you even begin to step into that with all this stuff going on? And, we talked through it, and I said, well, here's the deal. Number one, we're not going to ignore the emotion that the adults have. We're not going to inhibit it. We're not going to invalidate that. We're not going to tell teachers what they need to be thinking and feeling. They're free to think in fact, we're going to invite it. And when we have our first faculty meeting virtual, we're going to say, fill in the blank. I feel blank about blank because blank, or I feel blank about school because blank. And whatever you feel is fine. We want to invite all of that emotion out. And then we're going to instruct it using the model that we talked about, and again, at an adult level. So we said, that most teachers, fortunately, did not have any problems identifying their feeling. And there were a lot of understandable feelings. I'm mad. I'm mistrustful. I don't trust you. How long are you going to be here? I'm confused. I'm scared. I'm sad for the kids. I mean, a lot of intense emotion. So it was no surprise, when we identified feelings. But then we validated it. And I think that's really where teachers were surprised when we said, yeah, I'm angry too. I'm confused too. I'm feeling hopeless too. I'm scared too. We as a leadership team, we share those feelings. And I think that was surprising because they were thinking that we were going to sort of do hey, you need to get over it and get on, and it, we didn't do that. So just by validating the emotion, I think that just calmed everything. It just soothed everything. Everyone knew that they had permission to feel whatever they felt. So that was great. But then we did this. You said, hey, by the way, we feel that, those things that you feel, we feel that too. But you know what we're not going to do with that emotion? We're not going to get on Facebook and start throwing each other under the bus. We're not going to get on Instagram and start posting trash about the district. We're not going to start pulling parents aside and saying, just between me and you, this is why these guys are idiots. We're not going to do any of that stuff because it's just not helpful. So you're free to feel angry, can feel all of that, but you're not free, and I'm not free to engage in those toxic, hurtful behaviors. So then we set a boundary, which was actually really helpful. But here's what you can do. You can say to any leader, I'm feeling angry right now. How can you help me? I'm feeling frustrated. What can I do with that? You can keep a journal. You can practice yoga. You can do whatever you need to do to flush the anger out. There are so many good things. And in fact, we're going to put a box in the front in the principal's office, and man, no matter what you feel, if it takes you 20 pages to write out how angry you are, do it. You could put your name on it or not, and then you can put it in the box, and then we're done, that's just one way that you can let us know how you're feeling. You're always free to express any emotion through that vehicle, through that box there. That'll be kept secret. So we talked to them about what were the inappropriate ways to express the emotion, and then what were the appropriate ways to express the emotion. And then the last thing was, rewarding the approximations of that behavior. Any approximation of the behavior. So when a teacher, I told the principal, I said, listen, man, if you get a note in your box that says, I feel angry because you're incompetent, you're an idiot, and you're ugly, and your mother dresses you funny. If you get deeply, deeply personal attacks, you can't take it personal. You have to recognize that, hey, they're doing what you asked them to do, which was express their emotion in writing in a secure place. And so he said, great, I got that, man, no problem. And so, he would, no matter what they wrote, he would say, thank you, this is what you're supposed to be doing. I'd much rather have this than have some kind of silly comment on Facebook that's never going to get undone. So thank you, this is awesome. Keep doing that as much as you need. So that's what it looks like at an adult level. If I'm an adult level leader, I need to let people feel their feelings. I need to set boundaries around this is not okay. And then I need to offer, this is what we're going to do as an adult. To express our feelings. And then we create a social contract around that. We as adults just say, hey, let's agree that we're going to be life givers and not life suckers. I'm not commanding that anybody has to be thrilled or happy or excited or, we're smiling, everything's great, I hate it. We're not doing that. You be real with your feelings, and then let's manage them in ways that are life-giving and not life-sucking. So that's it. Okay. So in summary, that's it right here. All emotions are okay, none are bad, and there are helpful and hurtful ways to handle our emotions. And that, again, is just a paraphrase of the great Fred Rogers. So I hope this module has been helpful to you. The bottom line, I think, is that now we know that we really don't have to be afraid of our emotions. Our emotions are a powerful fuel source, and when we connect them to the right behaviors, we drive ourselves to peak performance. We actually become the best versions of ourselves. So, as always, thanks for all that you do. Thanks for watching, and we appreciate you.